right, so happy Thanksgiving week. Sorry we don't have the week off, but we've pushed right ahead. Quick reminder of how the end of the semester is going to sneak up on you. We have this week, then we come back for a week, and then everything's due the following Monday. So there's not a lot of time left. So just kind of trying to remind you of that. But anyway, we're going to work today to do an elevation view. Remember, as part of your final for this class, you do have to do 2 line drawings. Elevation, plan, and section. We'll do those 3 in class over the next couple days. And then you'll be able to pick which of the 2, basically pick the 2 best of the 3, and you'll use that for your assignment. So the idea here is that you spend all this time building a great complicated model in Rhino, and then you get to the point where you need to show plans, or you need to show sections, or you need to show elevations. You should be able to use your 3D model to build those without too much extra work. And so my goal today is to show you how to take your 3D model and actually make it something that's presentable from a line drawing, a traditional line drawing standpoint. We will use a little bit of Illustrator today. If you've taken my 135 before, it'll be a piece of cake because you'll know Illustrator, you'll be ready for it. If you've never done anything in Illustrator before, don't panic. I will make sure that there's a couple steps that you can follow that you will get decent results out of it. So even if you're a little uncomfortable in Illustrator, we'll still get to an actual output from what we're doing today. I've opened my master site file. This is the one that I do the renderings in. And the first thing that I'm going to do when I create this elevation is I'm going to do a save as. So I'll go to File and then Save As. I'm big on the Save As because if you end up exploding blocks or whatever, you may end up destroying parts of your model. And this way you're not destroying the real master site file. There we go. So I've done the Save As. Now what I have is not precious, so we can go ahead and work going forward. So a couple things about the elevations. Oh, I should also point out that everything that I'm going to go through today, if you go to Assembly 10.8 in the tutorials, it walks through exactly what I'm doing, though this is for Rhino 5, so there's a couple differences. Like right here, we're going to skip this rectangular plane because we don't need it anymore. But anyway, I'll walk through it, but it is all there, so if you get a little bit lost, you can go and double check on it from there. So the first thing that I need to think about when I'm looking at my drawing is where's my view going to be that's going to give me the elevation? And the good news is, assuming that your drawing is orthogonal, if it was built on axis and placed on axis, it's pretty easy. All we really have to do is go to our views, go to Set View, and then pick, it's usually the front, right, left, or back view, and you can kind of jump your way through. In my case, the front view is the elevation view that I want. It's already oriented correctly to my view. Now what about, however, if we have a view, let me go back and get into perspective view. Actually, let me I'm going to go to my exterior render 3 view. Now what if this building was turned or shifted, and I wanted to be able to create, instead of a south elevation, a southwest elevation or something? We could do that the same way. We could still set it up. It's just a couple extra steps. So for those of you that have your building off axis, where you can't use one of the standard views, you can actually orient your camera. So if I go to Set Camera, and then I go to Orient Camera to Surface, it's going to ask me to select a surface. So all we need is a flat surface on the front of my building. So I could pick something like this. Let's do, well, that one will work. And then select Point on Surface. So I'll come over here and I'll select a point on the surface. And it'll reorient my view so that I'm looking at that particular surface. Now this isn't exactly the view I wanted because it's still in perspective. So what I'm going to do is, with nothing selected, I'll come over here into my Properties window, and I'm going to change the projection type to parallel instead of the projection type being perspective. And then I can zoom out and I can get that view. Now in my case, in this particular scene, this was already the front view, so I didn't have to go through those steps. But sometimes you'll be off axis and you'll want to be able to create a view that's flat to the surface of your building. So I wanted to point that out. That's how you would go about doing that. once I have my building kind of lined up and in the approximate size that I want, including the background that I want, I'm going to go ahead and go to my saved views. So I'll go to Set View, Named Views, and I'm going to rename, or I'm going to save the view. There we go. As front elevation. And I'll go ahead and say OK. There we go. That'll let me come back to that front elevation view later on should I want to do that. So we have two kind of forks to what we're trying to create. The first fork that we're attempting to pursue is that we need to create a line drawing from what we see on our particular building. And the second part is it would be nice to have some kind of an underlay that gives us a little shadow to that line drawing. So we're going to start with creating the line drawing first. And we're going to use a command to do this called Make 2D. And I would say that this is probably second to maybe Project, one of my favorite commands in Rhino. It's very, very cool to be able to create a line drawing from whatever view that you see. This, by the way, doesn't have to be limited to just a flat parallel projection. You could create a line drawing out of any perspective in the same way. Furthermore, the line drawing that it creates are all live lines. So when we get into Illustrator, we can manipulate the lines, we can work with them, etc. So what I'm going to do to create the line drawing is I'm simply going to type Make 2D. So I'll go ahead and type Make 2D into the command line, and I'll press Enter. And when I do that, it's going to say Select Objects to Draw. At that point, I'll go ahead and type in All. That selects all of the objects. And I'll go ahead and press Enter. I then get the Make 2D Drawing Options dialog box. So first off is what view am I working on? Well, I am working on the front elevation. That's good. The projection type is going to be for the view. That's good. We come down here into our options. We have the ability to maintain source layers if we want, or we can just drop them into like kind layers. For the default here, I'm going to go ahead and say from input objects. That's a good place to start. I'll talk a little bit more about maintain source layers a little bit later on. Then we have checkboxes for tangent lines, hidden lines. I like both of those turned on. You can skip the tangent lines if you want, and you can see kind of a preview up here of what appears. So if the tangent lines were turned off, this arc would just appear completely clear. And if I turn that tangent line on, I get a little bit of a break where it starts to turn. It's a personal preference. I tend to leave it on. Worst case is in Illustrator, you can get rid of it later on. The scene silhouette basically darkens the outside of your building a little bit. It gives you an extra line all the way around your building. You can choose to turn that one on, turn that one off. Again, it's up to you. This one here is very, very important, and it actually saves us a bunch of steps from the old version. If you look here, right here, I used to have to create this viewport rectangle to do essentially what that checkbox does. And so I don't have to do it anymore, which is great. So it saves us a little bit of time. But you do absolutely have to check that viewport rectangle box. If you don't, it's going to make lining things up later on a little bit more challenging. And we can go ahead and group the input. That's fine. The new layer that it creates is called Make 2D. That's fine as well. So we'll go ahead and say OK. And in my trial runs of doing this, the Make 2D command took about 50 seconds or so. The good news is when you initiate Make 2D, it actually puts a little progress bar in the lower corner so you can kind of see if your computer hangs or doesn't hang, etc. So, of course, it's hanging for me right now. But we'll let it run for a little bit. And there you go. It was able to do it, and it took 53.68 seconds. Nice. So you say, OK, well, that's great. What happened? Well, here's what happened. If we double-click to get out of the front elevation view, and we instead look at the top view, so we're looking straight down, and you zoom out a little bit, you're going to see a line drawing with the viewport boundary of your building. And so let me go ahead and move this, and I'll take it from this corner right here. Oh, you know what? It's already at 0, 0, so I don't have to do that. But let's turn off the other layers so we can see this a little bit better. And actually, let me look at it in the perspective view. I'm going to borrow this and change it to perspective so you can see it. So essentially what it is, if I were looking at it, is it's created a flat line drawing right there of the view that I just saw. So that's that elevation view. So we need to go ahead and we need to export that, but I need to clean it up a little bit first anyway. So before we do any exports, I'm going to go ahead and select this boundary, and then I'll go ahead and type trim, and I'll get rid of the objects that go outside of it. Let's see here. Not quite sure why those guys aren't trimming. We can go ahead and explode those. Sometimes there's little issues. No, it really doesn't want to trim for me. All right, well, we'll leave them. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select just my curve here. Why is that? Hold on a second. This is not going to export correctly. Oh, I might have to ungroup. Yeah, there we go. And that will let me get rid of those. Let's ungroup these. And then I can get rid of that. Perfect. So what I need to do is I need to export just the drawing itself. Oops, looks like I need these pieces too. And those probably need to ungroup. So I can get rid of those. All right, one more time. So I'll select the drawing itself plus the viewport boundary. I'm going to jump back into the top view so we're looking down on it. There's my drawing. I'm going to take this and I'm going to export it to Illustrator. So I'll go up to File and then choose Export Selected. I'm going to change the Save As type to Adobe Illustrator right there, and I'll give it a name and put it on my flash drive here. So let's go into my folder for today. We'll call this Elevation. Can't type, but that's okay. And I'm going to click on the Options button here. And in the Option button, this one's going to start to matter a little bit. And so we need to go through and change our model scale. Now, why it's in millimeters, that's a problem. So let me hit Cancel for just a second. My units are off. So let me go ahead and switch into inches. That's a mistake on my end. I'm shocked I haven't caught that yet. All right, so let's try that one again. And we're going to go to File, Export Selected, switch to Illustrator. Needs to go on my flash drive. All right, now in the options here, this preserve model scale is really important. We need to think about what the scale should be. So I have this written out, so if you guys lose track of it, it's right down here. If we want it to be 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, we're going to do preserve model scale 48 inches equals 1 inch. So I'll come over here and I'll say 48 inches equals 1 inch for this particular drawing. So the great thing about this is that I can keep this at scale. So unlike SketchUp and Photoshop when we do that collaging, this one when I export will be actually to scale. So I'll go ahead and do that and I'll say OK, and then we'll click on Save. And it brings up these dialog boxes again. 48 inch equals 1 inch. We'll go ahead and say OK. And there we go. It's now exported the Illustrator version for me. OK. So now with that Illustrator line drawing ready, the other piece of this puzzle is I'd like to do a little bit of a backdrop for it. So let me go ahead and go into set view. I'm going to go back to that front elevation view. Oops. Set view, front elevation. Well, it did not save for me. That's a problem. It's weird that it didn't save. Well, I might have to go in and re-export because these aren't going to line up now. So let me try that one more time. I apologize. Okay, let's save that one more time. I'm going to go to Set View, Named Views, and we're going to do front elevation. Why is that not? Huh. The perspective looks fine, or the preview looks fine. All right, it is what it is. So I have to do the Make 2D again. So let me go ahead and get rid of all those layers. Yes to all. And I'll do that Make 2D one more time. You guys get practice seeing it. So I'll type in Make 2D, select Objects to Draw, it would be all. I'll select everything. I'll press Enter when done. And then right here, I'm going to uncheck the group output. I think that's where I had a little bit of trouble. Tangent lines, yes. Hidden lines, yes. Scene silhouette, yes. Viewport rectangle, yes. This time I'll actually do the Maintain Source Layers. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. So again, this is going to take a little bit of time to run, about a minute or so. If you struggle with the Make 2D, if something were to happen and it was crashing or taking too long, if you start exploding your blocks and getting individual lines out of them, that can help. Sometimes if you just turn off furniture, the complexity of a sofa can sometimes really bog down the Make 2D. So sometimes turning off the interior furniture is a good strategy for making it go a little bit faster. So bear with me for a little bit. Perfect. That one took a little bit longer because of the maintaining the source layers, but I did that. That's good. Now I'm going to switch back over into the top view. There's my new drawing. That's good. I need to go through and trim like I did the last time. So I'll take the bounding box here. Actually, I'm going to hide the terrain temporarily. That'll make this a little bit easier to see. I can hide this infinite plane too. Perfect. And I'll use this to trim. So I'll go ahead and type trim. And I'm going to trim off everything that's outside of that bounding box, like that. Then I'll take just the bounding box here, and I'm going to export this. Oops, I don't need that little piece down at the bottom there. Perfect. I'll go to File, and then Export Selected. Under my options, still 48 to 1. I'll say OK, and then I'll go ahead and click on Save. And it'll export. It is important that this be located right at 0, 0, which in this case it was, so I don't have to move it. If it wasn't, I would need to move that viewport to 0, 0, because otherwise the export puts it in the wrong spot and Illustrator can't find it. Okay, so I have that done. I'm going to jump back over into the front elevation view right here. I'm going to show that terrain again. There it is. And now what I want is I want some kind of a backdrop that I can use as an underlay for my line drawing. Just gives a little texture, a little context for it. And I have two options for creating this. The first one is to do a V-Ray rendering. And what I have for you guys to help you out is if you go to the digital tool site and go to the quick rendering setups, if you scroll down past the day scenes, past the night scenes, past the sunset scenes, we get into this last one, which is called a clay rendering. And so in the clay rendering, I have two versions of the settings that you can load. This one, this clay render one, is meant for you guys with the new version of V-Ray. You'll need to right-click on it and click Save Link As, and you'll be able to save it in your Downloads folder. If you single-click on it, it's going to give you a bunch of text that won't help you. So make sure you right-click and say Save Link As instead. And then we can go ahead and load that into this scene. So again, this is where we'll start to mess things up, so I'm glad we did a Save As before we did it. Okay, and so I've opened up my V-Ray Asset Editor. I'm going to go into my settings, and I'm going to load, let's see where it is, there we go, load render settings. I have that in my Downloads folder. There it is, and I'll go ahead and click on Open. And the big thing that it does is it turns on the material override, and it overrides all the materials with the color white. And so by overriding all the materials with the color white, I'm basically changing the drawing from having materials to having nothing and just having white. It also adjusts the camera exposure just a little bit, etc. So now, assuming that my render output right here matches my viewport, which it should, and I start to perform a render, I should get a black and white version of my scene. So now in this case, I'm seeing some of the lights actually being on. I really don't need the lights on, so I'm going to click on Stop here, and I'm going to select the lights. So let me type in SEL light for an easy way to select the lights, and I'll go ahead and turn those off. I'll just type hide, and they'll go away. It also wouldn't hurt for me to turn back on the sun. So I'll find the sun and I'll turn that one back on. It's right there. It's not, this sun is not in the best position for this elevation. It would be nice if it was moved a little bit. So let me do a quick modification of the sun. Let me click on Edit here. I'll uncheck Manual Control. I'll go back to San Francisco. And then under the time of day, I'm just going to swing it around to right about there, and I'll say OK. Now it's pointing this way. I'll get a shadow cast on the hillside, which is nice. OK, so let me go ahead and go back, and I'll perform a render again. And so you can tell as it starts to work that really this is about just kind of background shadow. We're not getting too much detail, just a little bit of what the shadow would look like. It looks reasonable. We're going to keep working through it. One of the suggestions I would make, though, in this, and you might not be able to see it on the screen as much, but because of the color of the sun, some of the shadows end up a little bit brown. And I think it can make a big difference if you just turn on monochrome mode and it just goes to grayscale instead. You can, of course, do this after the fact in Photoshop. You could post-process it into a black and white image, but clicking the box here for monochrome, I think by itself can help. I also will let you guys know that I have some errors in my terrain. I don't know. I spent time this morning trying to figure out why, but this little spike here is not a flagpole. It's somehow the seam and the terrain didn't come together correctly, and it's not rendering right. I don't know how to fix it, but that would be something that I could Photoshop afterward. There's a little artifact there, and there's a little artifact right there. Again, not quite sure why. So I'm going to let this continue to go for a little bit in the background, and then I'll come back and I'll save it. I want to show you another option for these, and this was something that I hadn't done in previous versions of Rhino, but I think it turned out pretty nice when I was playing around with it, and that is I'm going to switch my view. Instead of in Ghosted or in X-Ray, I'm going to come down here and play with some of the other view styles. This is kind of like scene styles in SketchUp. But I'm going to go to the Arctic scene style here. And when I do that, you guys, by default, I was playing around with it, so I changed it. Let me change it back to what you will see. This is what you'll see when you turn it on. But it kind of gives a nice little texture to it. But I don't want to see the lines because I'm going to ultimately have my own lines in Illustrator, so I want those to go away. So let me show you how you can adjust what is shown on one of these views. And what I can do is I can go up into my tools, I can go to Options, and under the View drop down here, when I open it and expand it, you can see that there's a display modes set, and I can come down to the particular display mode that I'm showing. So in this case it's Arctic. And then within that, I can go into the objects. Oops, Arctic here. Oh, I don't even have to go there. With that selected, I can look at visibility, and I can turn off. I don't want to show the points, and I don't want to show the edges, and I don't want to show the seams, and I don't want to show curves. And you can see that I'm getting to where it's just a black and white drawing, or a black and white shadow. I've got serious issues with my terrain. Again, no idea why it's being funky like this, but I can get pretty good results. So that looks reasonable from a shadow standpoint, so I might want to save this. I might also take it a step further and select my terrain and type hide so that I get just the building. This looks a little cleaner because the terrain is kind of messed up. So with that showing like this, I can export this as well. It's a little different than Rhino. I'm going to go back to that capture. You guys remember that. I'll click the little drop down here. I'll go to Capture, to File, and I'm going to save what I'm seeing here. So I want to lock the viewport aspect ratio, but notice here under size, oh, and by the way, by default it shows viewport, in which case the size of the viewport is pretty small. So change to custom, check the box for lock viewport, and then up the size, maybe to like 5,000 on a side, something like that. It's pretty good. I think the rendering one was 1080, so I'll stick with 1080 there. So all of that's good, and then I can say OK. It'll ask me where I want to save it. Let's save it into today's folder as an option here. And there it is. We'll call this, what was it, Arctic. And I'll click Save. So it's just kind of a different background texture that we could potentially use. So I have that one saved. Let's check on how my rendering is turning out. There's my render. It's finished. Looks pretty good. I get the shadows in this render, which I don't get in the Arctic mode right there. So it's a little bit different. So I'm going to keep the shadows for this one. So we'll go ahead and I'll save this. So I'll click on the little save icon. I don't need any of my other channels, so I'm not overly worried about it. And I'm going to save it not as a PNG, but as a JPEG. And so this would be my shadows. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. And that'll save my shadows for me. Like I said, I have those little errors, so I'm going to need to correct those probably in Photoshop, so I might have to open those up and make those quick corrections. But now that I have the background, both styles, ready, it's time to go ahead and open up Illustrator and take a look at what I have. So let me go ahead and jump over into Adobe Illustrator, and let's take a look at that file. I'll go to File and then Open. And there's my front elevation. I'll go ahead and say Open. Like that. Perfect. Let me press Control- so we can see out a little bit here. This is the overall size of the drawing that I created. The white space here is my artboard. That's what Illustrator is letting me work with. I'm going to edit that artboard to expand to be the same size as my drawing. So let me come in here and go to the artboard tool, which they've conveniently changed the icon. There it is. And I'm going to adjust the edges so that this lines up perfectly with the viewport boundaries that were exported as well. So there it is. It's snapped to those corners. That's my artboard. When I'm done, I'll go back to the direct selection tool, or the regular selection tool. I can press Control-0, and now I can see, well, it's not quite right. Let me edit that artboard one more time. I was too far away here. Make sure it snaps right to those lines. That looks good. That looks good. There it is right there. All right, now I have that artboard set. So with the artboard set, Control 0 again, I can see the overall line drawing, and I can start to manipulate this line drawing and make it look a little bit better than it does. So over here under layers, you can see that there are a bunch of layers that have been created for me, and it's kind of a big mess. So what I like to do first is I like to create two layers. One I'll call hidden, and the other I will call visible. It would be nice if they exported the nested layers rather than just exporting all the layers. And so what I'll do, to make this a little bit bigger, I'm going to go down and I'm going to select all of the hidden ones first. So I'll hold down the Control key on the keyboard, and I'm just going to keep clicking wherever it says hidden. You could do the opposite. You could start with the visible. It really doesn't matter. All right, I've got all of those. I'm going to click and drag and put them on the hidden layer so that they become a sublayer. Then I can come through and I can select all the visible lines. There's all the visibles. I'll hold down Shift, and I'm going to put all of those on the visible layer. And then I can kind of close those down. This lets me work a little bit easier with groups of my objects. So first thing I can do is I can turn off the hiddens altogether, and I can see what my object looks like with the visible lines. I can then go through and I can start to make modifications. So I could come in here and I could look for the visible lines and the window versions. So these are things that have the windows on them. I could select all of the lines on that layer by clicking right next to the circle here. That would select all of those lines. And I could then edit the properties of those lines. So I could come over here and under stroke, I could say, you know what, I want the windows to be 0.25 points. So they get a little bit thinner. There they are a little bit thinner. I could come back to my layers and I could say, okay, what other layers have windows? Those are windows. Sometimes you need to really expand this a little bit more. There's window mullions. All right, that looks like all of them. I could go back to properties here, and we'll change that to 0.25, like that. The other option would be to go through and manually select things. So I could select the outer walls by holding down Shift, and I could work my way through all of the outer walls. It's a matter of preference. There is always going to be some cleanup work to do. So there I have that window. This is the line of floor. Well, I don't need that line because it wouldn't really show up in the elevation, so we can go ahead and delete those. Somehow these windows those pieces of the windows got put on the wrong layer, so we could go through and change that 0.25, and now that's corrected as well. So you kind of have to go through and spend a little bit of time making some corrections. So that there could also go to 0.25, but the outermost boundary there should be a little bit thicker. Let's do that at 1 point. Looks like I have some lines that aren't colored correctly. So those purple ones, I could go to the Select menu, and I could say Select Same Stroke Color. That would select all the purple lines. And I could say, well, first off, let's change the color to be black. That's better. And let's leave it at 1 point. Those are changed. I could select the blue here. I could say Select Same Stroke Color. Those are all the blue. We could change that to black as well, like that. This line here is the roof. We don't need that. That can go away. I don't need that red line there. I don't need that little piece. Oops. Let me zoom in here. So there's always a little bit of touch-up work to do. But as you start to look at this, you can see that it created a very accurate elevation for me. That is a line drawing that I could use as a line drawing. Furthermore, that is all the way to scale. It looks like some of my slope here didn't get included. So you may find that you need to create a little bit more. I'll use the pen tool here, start there, and I'll come down and create, oops. Let me not snap to that. Let me go a little bit past it. maybe like that. Let me disconnect those 2 points. There we go. This was the joint between my pool, but that really can go away. That line doesn't belong there. This diagonal line doesn't belong there either. I need this to continue up to that point. So I'll go back to my pen tool. We'll start there, and we'll continue all the way up to right there. This line here is a little bit long, so we'll pull that one back. Then that line can go away. This line here could actually come all the way to there. That is a piece of terrain. Actually, it doesn't belong there because that should be all one continuous piece. So there's always a little bit of kind of touch-up work to do. That would connect from here to there, like that. So you can see how I'm working my way through. This diagonal here can go away. That diagonal can go away. All right, we're starting to get there. This diagonal here, that can go away. So I'm concentrating on the building outlines. This should be a little bit thicker. You can also, with something selected, you could use the eyedropper tool to match the properties of something else. So if you already have a particular property set, like those up there, I want those to match the windows. That'll change that a little bit faster. This one here, I want to match that thicker piece. This here, I want to match that piece. And let me come back and match to those pieces, etc. You get the idea. So I'm working my way through, making sure I've selected everything and that the line weights are the way I want. I also have the option to thicken up certain pieces of line weight. So the further away I am, maybe I want the outline of my building to end up being thicker. So I want pieces like this. Maybe I want those to be up at 2 point. Maybe I want this one to be up at 2 points, which would mean that one would be up at 2 points. Anyway, you get the idea of working your way around. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time working through the drawing, kind of cleaning it up, making it look good. Now, I have some other options. I have all these contour lines that were selected. Let me hold down Shift and select the rest of the contour lines there. And with these contour lines, maybe I don't want them to be black. Maybe I want them to be a fainter shade of gray, so I'll make them kind of a light gray color. I also could change what the stroke really looks like. So let me bring up my stroke window. I'll go to Window and then Stroke here. There we go. Let me show all the options. And maybe I'd like those to be dashed instead. So maybe maybe a 6 point by 6 point dash. And let's click off and take a look at them. And so now see how all those have become dashed lines? They have, oh, you guys can't see them. Never mind. Let me change those back to black because you're not going to be able to see them. Nope. I love it when it doesn't do what I want them to do. There, black. Thank you. There, now you can see those dashed lines. So I can make those dashed lines as well. I could take these, and I can use the eyedropper to match to that, and they should match. So you can use that eyedropper to kind of work your way through. So that's just a way of identifying where those contour lines are, but underemphasizing them. When it comes to the hidden lines, so those were all the visible lines, the hidden lines, I could take all the hidden lines. I'm just going to select all of them right now. There they all are. I'm going to make all of them a faint gray color, something like that. I'll make all of them dashed. So let me go into my window and then stroke again. There it is. I'm going to make them all maybe 0.2. I'm going to make them all dashed, and instead of 6, I'm going to make that much finer. We'll go 1 by 1. So there are little itty-bitty lines there. And now all of those, they're there. You guys will never be able to see them, but they're extra information, and that can add to some depth in the overall final drawing. So that you guys can see them, I'm going to darken that up. There you go. Whoops, didn't look like I got them all. There. There you go. Now you can see those lines a little bit better. So it's just an extra layer of information. It doesn't overpower the elevation, but it gives us a little bit more about what's going on inside the building as you start to zoom in. And that can be nice in a presentation drawing. Let me go ahead and press Control-0. So I've got the elevation figured out. I've gone ahead and I've drawn the elevation, minus some corrections and some line weights, etc. But sometimes it's also nice if we use a little bit of the fact that we can render this drawing to give some shadow or some depth to the drawing behind the line drawing. I can go to File and then Place, and I can drop in that clay render. And I was very careful each time to make sure that everything always lined up. My viewport was always the same, which is going to make lining these up that much easier. So let me go ahead and adjust the size of this. I can actually hold down Shift and keep the size in proportion, and that clay render is going to drop right behind my line drawing, and it should be perfectly like that. Now, if the clay render is a little bit too dark for the line drawing, if you're seeing too much of it, oh, and I should have put that on its own layer. Let me go ahead and create a new layer, and let me change that to be up on, there we go, we'll call this line drawing. All right, this is clay render. And let's put the clay render below the hidden layer in the layer stack. And there it is. So if that ended up being too strong, I could select the object, I could go to Properties, and I could adjust the opacity. So we could drop that opacity down so that it wasn't quite so strong. It's amazing how different it looks on the projector. There's a point at which you kind of get the happy medium, where you're getting enough of it behind, but it's not overpowering the line drawing. For me, on this computer screen, it would be even less than what it is on the projector right here. It's a little bit too dark, but you'll find that kind of naturally what the right place is. The idea here is that it's giving you a background with a little bit of shadow so that your building and your line drawing really start to stand out. And you already have that information. You already have the sun, so it's really easy to create that rendering effect that goes behind your drawing itself.